Oh, hello there. How are you all doing today? I'm doing great. Hope you're all having a good Friday. Normally, I would be doing the chapter review today on Friday, but it's looking like that's probably not going to happen today. So, probably this weekend sometime, I would say. Yeah. Hey, since I have you here, do you want to talk about how the postal system works in the One Piece world? Because I could tell you, I mean, there's a lot of lore for how the post office works in the One Piece world. People sending letters and packages and various, things to courier to different islands. I could tell you all about it. And honestly, this isn't even one of those situations where it's like, how could you make an entire video about that teching? Oh, I could make like probably like a 3-part series about this particular thing, but we can narrow it down with the bullet points to just one video if that's okay. But there's actually surprisingly a lot of information about how the postal system works in this world. So yeah, if you're game, I'm game. We just talk about that, I guess. Like, who needs the chapter when we could just talk about how stamps work, right? Like, yeah, sure, why not? Okay. So where do we even begin this? The legend of the post office goes back a millennium. In the first age of the Harley, the demons rose from the depths, the angels descended from the skies, and the post office was the great neutral ground of which they met. The first postmaster was the sun god himself, followed by Joy Boy, and now Luffy is destined to be king of the postmasters. I think I might have just created like a parody side story of One Piece, That would be great. Okay, so the first thing I got to do to sort of get our bearings here is talk about the Blue Planet, all right? The world where the One Piece story takes place on, which we just recently found out the name. So that planet is similar to ours in a lot of ways, but also very, very different. Here is a picture of our planet that we're living on right now, which I believe is called E-Arth. Okay, so we live on E-Arth. You learn something new every day. And if you look at it, you can notice that there's a lot of water. In fact, our planet might be referred to as a blue planet or perhaps a blue marble, right? There's a lot of water on our planet. But you might also notice that there's giant chunks of land that are kind of all over the place, many of which are like connected to one another, except for Australia that's just kind of chilling out down there, right? Okay. Well, Blue Planet doesn't have really large continents like ours does. It pretty much just has one, and that's the Red Line, which is a big stretch of red rock and soil that goes around the entire planet, effectively dividing it into two different pieces, unless that it all collapses at one point, and I guess the planet would just be one piece. Roll credits. The red line might not even be natural. It might be some kind of artificial thing that was created a long time ago, but that's another story. It also might be a slumbering Jormungandr, but we just don't know yet, okay? So that's the Blue Planet. That's the One Piece world. Not a lot of really large islands. There's a couple. Every now and then you'll see like depictions of the One Piece planet, and it really depends on who's drawing it. Sometimes you'll see drawings in data books, sometimes in like supplemental material in the anime. Oda will draw the planet occasionally in the story itself, and there seems to be like at least a few islands that are pretty large, at least like Australia size, that are somewhere around in the world. But at least when it comes to the Grand Line, you got to remember this. Like, there's some islands like Alabasta in the Grand Line that are pretty big, but they all still have to fit within the confines of the Grand Line, that very small, compared to the rest of the world, ocean current that, stretches along the entire world, right? Okay? So Alabasta's big, but it's not so big that it's spilling out of the Grand Line into the calm belts, into the East and the South Blue, right? It still firmly fits within the Grand Line as all the other islands do. Sometimes you get islands like Ruskina or Amazon Lily that are actually in the calm belt itself, but nothing like a huge continent where you could just walk from the East Blue over the calm belt into the Grand Line, over to the other calm belt, into the South Blue from just one chunk of land. Like, none of that seems to exist, so just keep that in mind. During Odin's flashback, Marco mentioned that there's around 20 million islands in the One Piece world. Now, I'm sure that's just a rough estimate, but that's a lot of islands. And from Vegapunk's message, we also learned that during the Void Century, century, there was a massive global flood, and the world probably looked a lot more like our world before that flood. There was probably a lot more large continents, like there might have been a North and South America, there might have been a big, like African-sized continent back then, but due to this global flood, it got broken up into all of these different islands, and purportedly, the world is about to flood again pretty soon, which would reduce those islands maybe down to zero. The world might flood to such an extent that the only safe place left would be on top of the red line, which is, of course, where Marie-Joie is and where the government bases their operations and where all the celestial dragons live, hence that whole reason. And there's also the bridges that they're building, so they might be safe. But a good chunk of the islands are going to be underwater, except maybe for just like the highest of highest elevations, like mountains and things like that. But a good chunk of those 20 million islands are going to be submerged, right? So that just gives you a basic idea of how the One Piece world is structured. Vegapunk says something very interesting. I think he says this more to the viewers rather than to the people of the world that he's addressing. And the people of the world treat this like common sense. Vegapunk says that, of course, when most people are born on an island, they spend their entire lives on that island. And traveling between islands is very difficult. And the people of the One Piece world are like, well, no shit, genius. You don't need to have a giant brain to know that. Obviously, you're born on an island and you spend the rest of your life on that island and then you die on that island. Doy! To the denizens of Blue Planet, that's obvious. That's like not even something that should be even brought up. It's just like, well, duh. How else could it have been? Right? Okay. So just keep that in mind. The only time you are going to be traveling between islands frequently is if you are part of a very special kind of organization or you're an outlaw like a pirate or a revolutionary, right? And so the whole story is focused around pirates. So us going from island to island, we're reading the One Piece manga weekly. It's not a big deal to us, right? That's what the Straw Hat's whole journey is about. But to like a regular like radish farmer living in the South Blue, that is the furthest from the norm. Obviously, if you're part of the world government or Cypherpole or the Marines or some other organization, you'll be traveling the world as well. But other than that, are like very rare circumstances that you get yourself tied up into, you're going to be stuck on one island your entire life, okay? So let's say that you're living on this island in the West Blue, and you have one of your best friends that decides to leave. Not going to the other part of the blue, not going to like the North Blue or traveling over the red line, certainly not traveling over the red line, just traveling from one island in the West Blue to another island in the West Blue. Maybe like 20 miles away or something like that, right? That's already something that is fairly dangerous because you got to remember, there's pirates out there in the ocean. You got to watch yourself, right? But they do that. They travel to this other island, and you want to stay in touch with your friend. First of all, just to verify whether or not they made it there alive. So how are you going to do that? Well, there is a telecommunications system in the One Piece world. We're very familiar with that. They're called the Den Mushi. Oh, sorry, wrong one. The Den Mushi, right? The psychic snails. So yeah, the best way to explain them, honestly, they are snails that have a natural ability to psychically link and communicate with one another. And effectively, the people of the One Piece world have domesticated these snails. They feed them and they take care of their droppings and everything else you got to do with a pet. And in exchange, they've kind of taken advantage of that psychic network. They've attached various things like speaker grills and receivers, fax machines, phone numbers exist in the One Piece world, and they can communicate with one another via these devices. I'm not exactly sure if there's like a Den Mushi operator or like a relay point or something like that. I would assume there would probably be something like that. These devices that you attach them to are expensive, I would assume. Like if you want to get a fax machine for your Den Mushi, you got to go to the One Piece equivalent of Radio Shack because they probably still have Radio Shack, maybe a Circuit City, and you got to buy, oh yeah, this is the brand new model for the fax machine. It's like one of those old 90s fax machines, the ones that just like they have the little strip of paper you got to rip off. Like it's a very archaic kind of device, but you're lucky to get that at all, right? So if you have a Den Mushi and your friend living on an island 20 miles away also has a Den Mushi, you just pick it up, you dial their number. I don't know how long distance fees apply or whatever, but you could call them and just communicate with them that way, and that's all well and good. There is also the equivalent of like a Zoom call in the One Piece world. There are the video Den Mushis. However, those are way bigger and therefore a lot more expensive, not just to purchase, but also take care of. It's the same reason why you probably don't own an elephant in your backyard. Unless you do. I don't know. I mean, like, if you do own an elephant in your backyard, let me know. That seems like an interesting story to tell, right? Okay. But, like, yeah, most people don't own elephants in their backyard. Where are you going to keep them? How are you going to take care of all of their poop? Feeding them is going to be expensive, right? So that's the same reason only, like, really large cities, like, have, like, one video Den Mushi each. And we also saw that during Vegapunk's message, exactly how that works, right? So you're not going to own a video Den Mushi as just a regular dude living on an island running a bakery. You're just probably going to own an ordinary Den Mushi, probably just one per household is probably what most people would afford. Kind of thinking back to like the 80s when you had like one landline, one phone in the house, and that was kind of it, all right? So let's say, though, you don't want to just talk to your friend. You've talked to your friend. You've verified they've made it to that island. They're not dead. Fantastic. But then let's say their birthday's coming up, or Christmas is coming up, or the equivalent of whatever Christmas is in the One Piece world. Pretty sure you need a Christ figure or a Santa Claus-esque figure for Christmas to exist. So let's just go with birthday, right? Let's say your friend's birthday is coming up and you want to send them a nice card. You want to send them a nice envelope that has a birthday card in it. Okay, fantastic. Well, how are you going to do that? There's actually a couple of options. We've learned a lot in the SBSs, okay? So first of all, you got the news coup. You got these seagulls that are traveling between the Four Blues and the Grand Line delivering the newspaper, specifically the World Economic Times, because Big News Morgans owns a monopoly on print media in this world. Individual islands might have their own localized, print media, magazines, stuff like that. But when it comes to global news, there's only one name in town, and that name is Big News Morgans, baby. Right? Okay. And Morgans has something else to his advantage. He has a flying machine. He has a giant tea kettle that is lifted up by a big balloon and a bunch of other seagulls. Flying machines are very rare in the One Piece world. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the government goes out of their way to try to suppress the development of flight technology. Because, it's first of all, people are building hot air balloons. Then they're building Zeppelins. Then they're building, propeller aircraft. And then before you know it, you got stealth bombers. You know what I mean? So the government probably doesn't want people or kingdoms having their own localized air force because, then they could just fly up to the Red Line and attack Marijois. And that's not a good idea, right? They kind of like own geography right now because they're the kings of the hill and they don't want anybody to challenge that. The only way to get up there is via the Bondola or being a badass like Fish or Tiger, but they want to be able to control the Bondolas, like who gets to go and leave Marijois, unless you have bullshit devil fruit abilities, but there's not much you can do about that. They're just going to make sure that most people don't have access to flying machines. Morgans is the exception here. And remember, up until recently, Morgans was on the government payroll. They would literally just like give Morgans like kickback money to like print whatever story that the government wanted. Now Morgans kind of defied them recently and punched out that Cypherpole agent because now things are getting so insane in the world that Morgans doesn't care anymore about the money from the government. He just wants to print all these wacky stories, and he's already made his fortune, so he probably doesn't care very much about any of that, right? Now, if Morgans would have tried this a few years prior, like he started renting out his flying machine to pirates or the Revolutionary Army to like attack Marijois, I feel like the world government would have had something to say about that and probably would have stopped him pretty quickly. But now the government has like about 1,000 other things to worry about right now in the story, so Morgans is like not their top priority, right? Well, anyway, he controls all of these news coup, and the news coup receive money from like subscribers to the newspaper, and they bring the paper and everything like that. And Oda mentioned in an SBS, you can arrange with the news coup to deliver messages for you for an extra fee. And Morgans probably, hikes the crap out of that fee. I don't even want to imagine what it is, but it is probably not very fair, all right? It's like, oh yeah, sure, you want to send a birthday card to your best friend on another island? Okay, it's going to cost you. I mean, like... It could be something like in equivalent dollars. It might be a lot of money because it's like this is something that doesn't really exist that prominently in the story. Sending mail to other islands, that's a tall order, even if it's in the same blue you're in, right? It might be something like, give me the equivalent of like $50. and I'll deliver that message for you. And it's like, okay, who else are you going to go to? Small bird delivery? They can't do it. Albatross delivery? I don't know. With those numbers, they might even charge you more. So that would probably be the name of the game when it comes to Morgans. Look at like the two other postal services that exist in the One Piece world, which we'll get to them in a moment, and just make sure your prices are slightly lower, but they could still be really unfair, right? So I mentioned small bird delivery. We actually have seen this before in the story. Oda actually drew it in a cover page request. We see Boa Hancock writing a bunch of letters to Luffy, and then you see the little bird off to the side that's dressed in the postman outfit. That's the symbol in Japan for like a post box or like, you know, a mailbox to like send stuff away, right? And so the little bird is just like, hey, that's way too many letters. Ma'am, I can't send all of those. Just like the name implies, very small little like canary-esque birds that will deliver maybe like one letter at a time, or maybe a small, like maybe like this many letters at once to a location that is within close proximity, okay? So let's say you live on a rather large island and you just want to send a letter from one end of the island to the other. Small bird delivery would probably work for that. If you lived in an archipelago where like a bunch of cluster of islands are together, like for example the Konomi Islands in the East Blue, also the Gecko Islands where Usopp grew up. It was mentioned Usopp grew up in Syrup Village of the Gecko Islands, and I think Kaya, when she purchased Kuro's like birthday present, like those glasses, she mentioned she put in a special order at like another town and on another island of the Gecko Islands, right? So when it comes to like just one island, maybe sending messages across that, or from like a small grouping of islands, small bird delivery would probably be the one for you there. And I imagine the prices are probably the cheapest with small bird, because like, okay, you're just sending an island, it's just there, it's not that big of a deal. It kind of is reminiscent of like the carrier pigeons mailing system that was used actually a long time ago. Like people have been using birds to send letters as even far back as like ancient Mesopotamia and like ancient Egypt. They were utilized. Most notably, they were utilized during World War I in like the 1800s into the early part of the 20th century. We would have carrier pigeons that would send letters and stuff across battlefields and things like that, especially when like electronics and the telegraph and telecommunications would go down, right? So even after, you know, like the telegraph was invented and that kind of like hampered the use of birds, during wartime, it was pretty useful, right? Okay, so that's small bird delivery, and Oda's actually shown that before. Then we have the albatross delivery system, all right? So the albatrosses, they're big birds, huge birds that have a giant wingspan, sometimes over 5-6 feet long, and it takes a long time for them to take off, but once they do take off, they can stay airborne for a long-ass time, and they can fly vast distances, okay? So your friend is living on that island 20 miles away. You want to send them a birthday card. Small bird delivery is not going to cut it. That's just too far away for them to fly. So your only options are using the news coup system, which is probably quite a bit of money, or the albatross delivery system, right? And Oda even goes on to say that, like, the albatross delivery can be used, but there's problems with that as well. And the albatrosses they can send larger packages, but not like insanely huge. It's not like, hey, I'm gonna send my best friend a new television or something. You know, okay, maybe not a new television. Let's say you want to buy your friend a refrigerator, because they do have refrigerators in the One Piece world. Albatrosses might be really big, but there's still a weight limit. I don't think you're going to be sending your friend something like that, okay? But if you had like a relatively like small to medium-sized package that maybe weighed like 5 to 10 pounds and you wanted to send that to them, albatross delivery's there for you. You are probably going to pay an arm and a leg for that. I'm not 100% sure if this is what albatross delivery is, but Oda did draw this random cover page back during the East Blue. It's in the early portion of One Piece. You see Nami next to a really large burb, and it's right next to a mailbox. And so I feel like this is Oda depicting the albatross delivery system. Now, the albatross is wearing a Marine hat, and we don't know if the albatross delivery system is allied with the Marines, although I would once again assume that the government probably would want to control all of the communication systems and the post office systems in the One Piece world as much as possible. So when it comes to the albatross system, sending messages or big packages via island, The government would probably want to know, and probably would. The Marines are probably going through the mail, is probably what I'm saying, right? Especially if it's like there's a Revolutionary Army base on one island, it's like Vera, and they need to send a package of the goods to like another island. It might have to pass through a Marine branch office, and they might go through that just to make sure you're not sending something like dangerous, or, it's like Revolutionary Army correspondence or anything like that, right? Yeah, absolutely not. When it comes to like secretive communications, they have the white Den Mushi, which are pretty hard to get your hands on, but it like encrypts the message so no one can wiretap it using the black Den Mushi. So it actually gets rather complex. Like, in order to like have a message sent from one island to another, there's ways to do it, but it's not super simple. And then there's ways that it can be traced and like, hacked and stuff. So you got to figure out ways around that. It's really interesting. The government, not the Marines, but the government has their own unique method of flying animal to go and send letters, and that are the carrier bats. We've only seen them twice in the entire story, and both times they were used for the exact same reason: to send a letter inviting a pirate to join the Seven Warlords of the Sea. The first time we see a carrier bat is after Marineford, where a letter arrives to Buggy, telling him to like, hey, you have been invited, Buggy the Clown, to become a Seven Warlord of the Sea. Buggy accepts. And the other time was during a flashback when Jinbei was invited when he was a member of the Sun Pirates, and he also accepts, okay? So it would make sense for the government to have their own system, right? You could argue the government could just use Morgan's system, the news coup, but Morgan's controls that. At the end of the day, I don't know what it is, Morgan's has some hypnotic control over every seagull he meets. And it's not like he has the seagull zone. He turns into an albatross himself. So maybe he has just bird speak. He has the ability to communicate with birds, some kind of friendship link with the birds that nobody else in the One Piece world has. And so the government would be kind of stupid to do that, because ultimately Morgan's controls that system, not them. These bats are apparently not just nocturnal. They can apparently fly around during the day, which normally bats can't do. That's like a really important thing about bats, is they are heavily nocturnal, but not these bats. So yeah, the government has their own special network, but we haven't really seen the carrier bats utilized all that much. But whenever like very important messages need to be sent, that I guess aren't important enough for a Marine or a member of the Gods Knights to go in person, they will send a carrier bat. I guess maybe at the end of the day, they don't want to risk the lives of a Marine. Like, I'm sure Ace received a carrier bat when inviting him to the Warlords, and he just probably crumpled it up and burned it, right? If they would have sent a Vice Admiral to deliver that message, Ace might have like killed a Vice Admiral. So they probably don't want to worry about losing any really powerful operatives. They're not going to waste a God's Knight on that. The government, that higher up in the government, probably don't care about the Seven Warlords all too much. So it probably just makes sense to send a bat. Who would kill a bat? It doesn't make any sense, right? And in both instances, Jinbei and Buggy both took the message from the bat, and the bat just flew away. So it was safe. It was fine. So we got telecommunication network via the Den Mushi. We have small bird delivery via small letters across islands and maybe small archipelagos. We have albatross delivery for small to medium-sized packages. That might be albatross right here. Carrier bats the government utilizes. Any other way to send things? Well, yes, actually. And I would imagine, by the way, if you were like a member of the Marines and you wanted to send a letter home to your family, you could probably arrange that, right? Like, you could probably have your family living on your home island with a Marine branch office, and then you could send a letter, and the next time the Marines were there to, like, resupply or something, they would deliver the mail. That's probably a different system, right? Umit is a magnate. He's a shipping magnate that controls all of this different kind of cargo distribution up and down the Grand Line. We see this during the flashback we just had, actually. When Elbaf was opening up to the world, we see Umit delivering some highly prized Elbathian cedar, all right? So these are really giant cargo ships that Umit controls, and we even see the shipping yards and things like that, okay? It's like FedEx or some kind of like global merchant, shipping operation, right? So in theory, if you wanted to purchase something really, really big, like if you did want to purchase a refrigerator or something like that, or a video Den Mushi to be delivered to your island, or anything that building supplies, anything of that nature that's huge, you wouldn't be sending that via regular bird mail. It would have to be loaded onto a cargo freighter, all right? Now, like with anything, berries talk. So if you have a lot of money and like Mayor Whoop Slap of the of the Goa Kingdom. He's actually the secret king of the Goa Kingdom, but nobody tell anybody that. Yeah, you got Mayor Whoop Slap in Fuchsia Village, where Luffy grew up, right? All of the citizens during Vegapunk's message were like, "Mayor, can we purchase a video Den Mushi? Come on!" And the mayor is like, "Why do we need anything like that? Audio's good just by itself. Kids these days wanting video to go with their audio, yeah." Well, let's say Mayor Whoop Slap wasn't as much of a tightwad as he was, and he was like, you know what, that's actually a good idea. Innovation, that's what I say. Let's say he did want to purchase a video Den Mushi for Fuchsia Village. How would he go about doing that? Well, I would assume that in the One Piece world, and this is something that actually existed way more often in our world, if you wanted to purchase something like big, they would have catalogs. People would get catalogs all the time in the mail, like, for, department stores and other like specialty goods and things like that. This goes back all the way to like the 1800s, right? Get this big giant catalog and you look through it. You could even purchase houses through these things. Like seriously, you go through like a Sears catalog in the 50s. Oh, look, there's a house in here for $3,000. I'm going to buy that. They would come by with a giant flatbed truck, and your house would be there, and you'd have to build it and all the supplies and everything like that. Like, this was a thing that existed. Probably still does exist, just in a different method. Everything's online now, right? So, you would have this big, giant catalog, and one of it would probably be Video Den Mushis. Fuchsia Village is part of the Goa Kingdom, and so that's like the major city, so maybe Mayor Whoop Slap would have to travel to the city itself, because that might be where the big shipping freighters are actually stopping and dropping things off and stuff like that. So the mayor, loving his citizens, writes a request in for a video Den Mushi. He collects all of the money from the townsfolk and everything, and he's like, all right. He goes over to the Goa Kingdom, goes into the city, goes into the Umit Shipping offices, puts in the request, gives him the offer, and they're like, okay, everything's in order. You can expect your delivery in probably several months. It would probably be a while for this to be completely delivered. But then eventually, on an Umit freighter, there would be a video Den Mushi that was like, this is a live animal that we're taking care of and everything like that. And then it would have to be lowered off of the freighter. And then Whoop Slap would have to arrange some method of getting this Den Mushi all the way back to Fuchsia Village. So that's going to require probably an extra service of like renting a cart out. They don't really have vehicles like vans and trucks in the One Piece world. You kind of see some go-kart kind of things in Film Gold, but other than that, we don't really see them in the One Piece world all that much. So that'd be another method, or get on a boat from the Goa Kingdom docks and then sail back to Fuchsia Village. That would probably be the easiest way to do it rather than going on land. And then finally get back to Fuchsia Village. You unbox your big Den Mushi, your video transponder snail, and the citizens rejoice, and they have to all take turns feeding it and maintaining it and taking care of it and building a little, shed barn kind of for it and shoveling its snail poo and all of that kind of shit. But that's probably how it would go down. So I thank Oda for providing a system. If you want to order something from the One Piece equivalent of Temu, there is a process to this. Damn it. All right. Well, anyway, I've been going on for, almost 30 minutes now on the postal system in the One Piece world. So I hope that answered all of your burning questions. Let me know down below, how much do you think all of this would cost, to send video Den Mushis and stuff. Maybe if you work in the postal system yourself, or dealing with, exports and imports and things like that. Maybe you'd have a good idea on this, on the cost of all this shit. But it would not be cheap, all right? But it could be done. Thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Teching 101 signing out.